From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome to From the Void. I'm your host, John Williamson, and we're back with part 2 and the final episode in season 4. This is the second part of my interview with author Chris Woodyard. Chris is the author of the Haunted Ohio book series, but she's also written a number of other books about all sorts of other spooky things. She is currently working on various nonfiction subjects, several mystery series, fictional horror stories, and some historical novels. She's quite busy. Her most recent nonfiction books include the Victorian Book of the Dead and The Ghosts Wore Black, Ghastly Tales from the Past. So check out her social media links that'll be in the show notes. You can also connect to us on social media. And if you click on the Linktree link in our show notes or in the bio of any of our social media links, you will find a brand new web store where we have merchandise available for purchase. If you're interested in supporting the podcast that way, or if you just really like the logo, which I personally love, but if you like it too, there's all sorts of options on there for you. So thank you so much for listening to this season of From the Void. Really appreciate your support. We will be back before too long with season 5, as always, bringing you all sorts of new subjects and guests, and we'll always keep it interesting. So thanks so much for listening. Without further ado, this is part 2 of my interview with the legendary author, Chris Woodyard. You've been listening to From the Void. Yeah, it's very interesting. One of the terms that pops up that I think we should probably define as fortean, and where that term comes from and what does it mean?
Oh, fortean, yes. Charles Fort was a collector of weird stories, not just ghosts, but things like fish falling out of the sky or rains of blood or all kinds of mystery animals. He spent his whole life, adult life, making little notes on cards in like the British Library. And then he published these books. I think Lo is one of them with an exclamation point. He talks about UFOs. He invented the word teleportation. So he was a very early paranormal reporter. I won't say he was an investigator, because I don't know that he actually went out and looked at places. But he did write. There was a fish fall in Virginia, and he wrote to the editor of the paper asking for more details, and they published his letter in the paper. So he's one of the earliest, not the earliest, but he's an early adopter of, I'm not sure even what you would call it, because it is so wide-ranging. It is just weird stuff.
Yeah, very interesting. There's some humorous tales in your books, which I thought was rather funny, including some of men embalmed in booze. So, and the second one specifically, the one about the man in the cask of rum, I found to be the most entertaining and rather disgusting. But I'll let you tell the story.
I'm trying to remember. Is that in one of my Victorian Book of the Dead?
Yeah.
Okay. Just
Edward,
a sec.
Oh, sure.
Let me get
Edward
it.
Packenham. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, while you're looking, let me read this quote from there was some of the folks that knew him described him as his body was almost, he was quite the drinker, it sounds like. And they say his body was almost ready for spontaneous combustion before his death, which I thought was hilarious. And yet none ever saw him too much intoxicated to attend to business and to talk sensibly on any and all subjects, which is hilarious. So obviously his friends were like, this guy was constantly drinking, but he could get his business done. He could get his work done, which is good. So I thought that was a humorous.
I'm trying to find him. Oh, yes, he's packing him preserved in rum.
Yes.
This was from Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when somebody died at sea, they would actually pack them in rum. And I believe Lord Nelson's body was put in a cask and brought back. And he was taken out of the cask and put in a coffin and properly buried. But apparently, let's see, I can't think of the name of the man, but he sponsored a children's book prize. And he died at sea, was packed in the rum barrel or the liquor barrel, and they just buried the barrel because he was too decomposed. It really, it wasn't right. So, But this was General Edward Pakenham, who commanded the British in the attack in New Orleans on the War of 1812. And his grave has been found. The general's body was said to have been placed in a cask of rum and sent to England. On its arrival there, it was through mistake, not even opened, but shipped again, this time to Charleston. Reaching this city, it was sent to Macmillan, who kept a general stock of groceries and liquors. You can see where this is going with it. There a spigot was placed in the barrel, and the boys who'd returned from the war would congregate around the store, take large potations of the good old Jamaican rum, and tell of their exploits in the war. After the rum was exhausted, the head of the cask was knocked out, and the body of a man was found therein. They identified him as General Pakenham, and he was finally put in a coffin and buried near the store where they'd drunk the rum.
Ugh. So bad.
A cask floating down the river, and it had wine in it. So they started tapping it and drinking it, and then they opened up the rest of it, and there's a body.
Oh. Surprised no one got sick, you know? Like,
yeah, I'm sure they did.
Disgusting. Oh, man. Talk about some of the other traditions, too, because I think along with the Victorian era, they had some very specific to that time period, some very specific things and that they did in regards to shrouds, and I believe they're called crepes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, crepe was the mourning fabric. It was kind of a crinkly black fabric. You put it through a roller, and it had a sort of a speckled pattern on it. It was very scratchy. It smelled like death, apparently. They used supposedly toxic chemicals to keep to process it. Mm. And doctors railed against it and said, you're inhaling poisonous things when you wear a veil. It didn't stop people because etiquette said if you're a widow, you have to wear a veil. It's just the proper thing to do to show the proper respect for the dead. And crepe was used to trim it was used as trim on dresses and things like that. It also was hung on the door to announce a death. So if you saw a streamer or a scarf of crepe hanging from a doorknob, you knew that was a bereaved household. And people used to do this for fun. They would hang a piece of crepe on somebody's door and run away. And then people would start getting calls saying, who's dead? Who's dead?
Okay.
And it was a very shocking thing. I can't think of anything in modern life that would scare us as much as seeing this scarf of black crepe fluttering from a door. But it was quite an emotional event for people to see this. There are also wonderful stories about people seeing a crepe on the door, but it's not there. It's a ghostly crepe that's predicting there's going to be a death in the house next.
Wow. Yeah. Kind of continue on in some of the tales. What are some more of the unusual tales that you encountered when researching this? I saw somewhere, corpses, tales of corpses sitting up, and things of that nature.
Oh my goodness. Well, one of the creepiest ones is that you did not want cats at a wake, because they would try to chew on the corpse.
Ugh.
And there's a really ghastly one where it was winter and the corpse was nearly frozen. This was an unheated room, and the watchers suddenly see the shroud stir. And they're like, oh my God, what's going on? And they finally had the courage to pull the shroud back, and there was a big black cat chewing on the corpse. Mm. There was another one where they started the wake, and they kept the window ajar just a little bit, and this whole flock of cats started clawing at the window, trying to get in and howling and yowling, just desperate to get in. And they had to like beat some of them to death to keep them away from mutilating the corpse.
Wow.
So also, if you had a cat jump over the corpse, that person would become a vampire. That was one of the beliefs.
Yeah, gotta keep that from happening.
Keep the cats out of the funeral home. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, what are some of your favorite stories from those that era, I should say?
Oh my, I'm spoiled for choice here. One of the favorites, and this isn't really a ghost thing, but it's more of a fortean kind of a story. And I know that Charles Fort reported on some of these, the faces in the windows. You would have someone die, and a few days later, or almost immediately, you would see their face etched on the window. And sometimes there was a story that, they used to sit there during a lightning storm, and the lightning photographed it onto the glass. And the thing about these window pictures was that you'd wash them, and it would only make it brighter. You could only see them from the outside. You could never see them from the inside. And it was always a picture of a dead person. So I'm not sure what to think of that. We don't have any surviving examples of this, but they were a huge, I hesitate to call it a fad, but they were a huge theme in the 1870s in particular. They continue on. I mean, I've got other examples. I've collected probably 100 or more of these kinds of stories, but I'm just fascinated by what could have actually made this image appear. They called them lightning daguerreotypes sometimes.
Yeah, that is interesting because you do see certain trends that sort of fall out of favor over time. Like during the spiritualist, period of time when that was sort of all the rage and having seances and things of that nature. You see a great deal of emphasis placed on like ectoplasm appearing in photographs, and not really something you see much anymore, but very prevalent during that time period.
What's interesting to me is now in the spiritualist golden age, you had people tipping tables and levitating tables. People still do that today, which I find an extremely interesting continuance of the tradition. You're right, we don't have ectoplasm, possibly because it's been discovered it was phosphorescent cheesecloth or egg whites. That was another one. And the mediums were regurgitating this. They were searched physically, including cavity searches, before they went in to be studied by parapsychologists. But they would have things that they would actually regurgitate. So unsavory.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating time period because you had folks who were great believers on one hand, and one of the more famous individuals is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yes,
who was very interested in the world of spiritualism, and then on the other side you had like Harry Houdini, who spent a great deal of the latter part of his career sort of debunking the individuals who were kind of going around and holding seances and making these great claims.
There are wonderful stories of how the mediums did these things. What kind of machines or objects or masks they used to recreate spirits. And it's always sad to me to hear about someone saying, well, yes, I saw my mother walking out of the cabinet. And yet it couldn't possibly have been. And someone jumps up and grabs the medium in situ, and they realize that's who it is. But what were they seeing? Were they just so longing to see their dead relative that they actually saw something? The mediums used what was called the Blue Book. They would sometimes travel from city to city, and the Blue Book would have information on this person lost a son, his name was Richard, he liked to sail, he did this, that, and the other thing, and all these details that you could then use to impress these people, because they would say, this medium has never been to our house. They don't know who we are. And they had all this information about our dead son. So there were all kinds, and they would make sort of cynical little notes like, good for a lot of donations.
Wow.
So kind of sad there. And there were warehouses that had inflatable spirits that you could make run along the floor and then pop up. A rather naughty story had a woman who said that she was manifesting someone's infant who had died. It was her bare breast that they were feeling in the dark, and it felt like a baby's head because she was rather buxom.
Wow.
Yes.
Great to the lengths to which they will go.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, and it kind of, I would imagine it was a rather frustrating time for anyone who would claim that they had actual abilities, because you have these con artists out there who are clearly muddying the waters and making it much more difficult to take this, this type of thing seriously.
Yes. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I've read a good deal of spiritualist literature, and people have autobiographies about, how they started feeling the spirits and their spirit guides and how sincere they are about it all. And it's difficult to tell whether this is just another con job to display how sincere they are, or whether they truly believed that they had these abilities. It's really quite difficult to tell.
Yeah, even the some of the more famous, I'm trying to remember their name now. It's escaping me. The sisters,
Fox sisters, yes.
Yeah, even later in life, I think one said no, that we were really just con artists essentially, and then recanted later, and so there's even some confusion there in terms of whether or not they were legit or not.
Yes, and was that okay? We're going to recant now because we're under pressure. We'll say we were just snapping our toe joints, and that'll get in the newspaper. And then we'll recant, and then people will come to us again. Is it about publicity? Keeping the story alive. It's really hard to tell. Another supposedly married, a very famous Arctic explorer, Elijah Kane, and when he died or disappeared in the Arctic, his family disowned her, would not admit they had been married. So they had a kind of a rough life after getting all the limelight.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So what sorts of things are you working on these days?
I'm mostly doing the Victorian death kinds of things. I've just got a new book out called A is for Arsenic, an ABC of Victorian Death. I had done the Victorian Book of the Dead, which had more unusual. I didn't want to just do the standard, here's how Queen Victoria did it. I wanted what the man in the street was thinking about mourning. And even after I did that, people were asking me relatively what I thought were very basic questions. Why crepe? What's half mourning? And I thought, not everybody lives in the 19th century. I guess I better define these things. So, I've explained about arsenic and beer and BIER, where the coffin lies, crepe, death tokens, embalming, all kinds of just basic information. And it's all done with 19th century and early 20th century sources. And we have the most wonderful illustrations by Landis Blair. Very gory-esque, very gothic. I'm just in love with the illustrations. So I hope people will enjoy this and get something new out of it. Anybody who likes historic novels may get some information about terms that they've not known about or hadn't understood.
Yeah, it was very, very educational. Things that I was not familiar with. And it's always interesting from a historical perspective to see how our approach to death and the aftermath of a loved one dying has changed over the years, and some of the things that were traditions then that are no longer traditions now, and vice versa. So it's very, very interesting to see how our outlook on death has changed over the centuries.
I feel kind of bad that we've gotten away from a public symbol of mourning. Not that I want people to walk around draped in crepe veils, because that really was kind of unpleasant. And women report, yeah, I got a long crepe veil and everybody was stepping on it in the bus, and ripping my bonnet off my head. But, I had a friend whose husband died very suddenly, and she had to go to the hardware store about a week after he died, and the hardware guy was like, "Oh, turn that frown upside down. It can't be that bad." And it's like, yes, it could be that bad. And if we had some kind of a symbol to identify when someone is bereaved, maybe, I mean, there's always going to be insensitive people, but, maybe people would think before they speak like that. Because when you went out dressed in crepe from head to toe, everybody knew they needed to treat you with consideration. You were not to be harassed. We'll take care of you first at the store. We know you don't want to be out here. We're so sorry for your loss. But, we have black armbands for special occasions and famous people. But it would be nice to have some kind of a symbol that we could universally recognize when someone's been bereaved, because it is such a terribly trying time.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, also the period of time that we allow for others to grieve is just ridiculous. And I think, I wonder, in the Victorian era, was there a specific time frame designated to the grieving process, or was it sort of up to the individual?
It was generally set by the etiquette books, or whichever etiquette book you consulted, and it varied over the years. But in general, if you were a widow, it was a year and a day. It might be 2 years. This was what was interesting, was for children, if your child died under age 6 months, sometimes you didn't mourn, or you were not supposed to mourn publicly. If they were over that, then okay, you get 6 months. So there was a lot of variety. If your aunt died, maybe it would be 3 months, maybe it would be 6 months. And each of them had sort of a different stage. You'd wear all black with crepe in the first year if you were a widow. Then you could take the crepe off and just wear black for the next year or 6 months. And then you'd go into gray or purple or mauve, just sort of easing back into colors, because they thought it was too shocking for you to suddenly not be grieving and go back into regular clothing. So yeah, the time varied. And today, of course, I mean, if you can barely get bereavement leave of a week.
Right.
It's really disgraceful. And people feel pressured to get over it. Oh, well, I'm doing this wrong. I'm still sad after 6 months. No, it's indefinite, and you never know when it's going to hit.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, it's there are some things that we could probably learn from the previous generations in terms of allowing people that space to decide when they're ready. And you're right. I think having some sort of item or some way of identifying that you are someone who is going through grief might help others to be a little more sensitive to the situation that you're in. And yeah, that is very interesting. Yeah, I feel the same way about just in terms of the way that we approach grief now. With all you have to do, like you said, is look at the amount of bereavement leave that most companies provide. It's like there's no way that someone a parent or a child, that you are mentally ready to go back to a workforce after week, 2 weeks, whatever.
Exactly. Yes.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yes. But I don't know what we can do about it in terms of the way our businesses are currently set up.
Yeah, very true.
And to be fair, the Victorian woman was not out in the workplace generally. So she had, I won't say the leisure, but she could stay home and grieve and in private if she needed to. Although, you still had your household duties, but you didn't have a job where you had to show up. And men in the Victorian time had much more leeway. They might have to wear a black band. They might wear a headband on their hat band. of crepe or bombazine, but they really were not trammeled the way the women were.
Interesting. Yeah, things to think about in current context for sure. So, where can people go to stay up on top of everything that you're working on and get copies of your books that you already have out and all that good stuff?
Well, the books are online in the usual venues, and I have the Victorian Book of the Dead Facebook page where people can contact me for signed copies if they like. I'm trying to think what else. I'm on Twitter as Haunted Ohio Book. I'm on YouTube as Ghost and Grave. I'm on Boggart and Banshee, the Supernatural podcast with my partner Simon Young. So excited about that. And we do a lot of fortean and fairy things.
Very cool. Well, I will definitely make sure that all those links are in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, this is a huge pleasure for me, seeing as I really grew up on the Haunted Ohio books and have copies like within eyesight of me right now.
I love it. There's so many people come up to me and say, "Oh, I heard you speak in my elementary school or my middle school," and I'm like, "Oh man, have I been doing it this long?" Hard to believe.
I try not to think about how much time has passed either, so I understand.
Right.
Well, thanks so much again, and this is absolutely fascinating and an absolute pleasure. So thanks for taking some time out of your day to spend
Thank
with me.
you, and happy hauntings.
Thanks for listening to From the Void. If you've enjoyed this episode or any of our prior episodes and any of the 4 seasons that we have out, please consider subscribing so you don't miss a single new episode and leaving us a review. Also, telling a friend. That always helps. We are a small independent podcast, so word of mouth is one of the best ways for us to get out there for people who are interested in these types of topics. We will be back with an all-new season before too long, so stay tuned to our social media. We will be keeping updates on there. And as always, thank you so much for supporting. Really appreciate it. We'll be back with all new mysteries. And until then, you've been listening to From the Void.